Hey guys, hello. Welcome to the Body System 3 Anatomy. And today we will be discussing our cardiovascular part 3, which is in general the blood supply of the upper part of our body systems, which is the neck and upper part, right? So, I hope that you remember really well our previous classes regarding the anatomy, right? Let me just open it one more time. Okay, yeah. So we remember the arteries and veins that we had on previous presentations, right? To one more time, open this. We had this kind of structure. So yeah, we had like the branches from aorta which were coming out, and these were our, for example, from the aortic arch. We had what kind of brachiocephalic trunk and what branches? Who remembers? Exactly. Yes. And today, exactly, we are continuing these branches and further where they are going and what they are leading afterwards. We will be talking about that. So we remember that we're having the subclavian arteries, right? We remember that we're having our subclavian arteries, and subclavian arteries, they are on both sides of the arch and out of the thorax to enter the root of the neck. Exactly, this will be our right subclavian artery and left subclavian artery, right? And right subclavian artery is beginning in the posterior to the sternoclavicular joint as one of two terminal branches of the brachiocephalic trunk, and it arches superior and lateral to pass anterior to the extension of the pleural cavity to the root of the neck, right? And posterior to the anterior scalene muscle. Continuing laterally, crossing the rib number 1, it becomes the axillary artery afterwards, and it crosses its lateral border. So as you see here, how our right subclavian artery, it is continuing with the axillary artery afterwards, right? We've talked about the right one. However, the left one, left subclavian artery, begins at lower part in the thorax rather than the right subclavian artery. As a direct branch of the arch of aorta, it continues laterally over the rib number 1 and becomes the axillary artery as it crosses the outer border of the rib number 1. So thus we can say that our subclavian arteries are further divided into 3 main parts. First part, second part, and third part. The first part, it is the one which is extended straight ahead from the origin of the artery to the anterior scalene muscle, right? Who remembers this muscle? Yes. Yes. And exactly for in our rib number one, we're having like the scaled attachments, right? Second part, it is a part of the artery posterior to the anterior scaled muscle. And the third part, it is the part lateral to the anterior scaled muscle before the artery reaches the lateral border of our rib number one. So, as you have noticed here, our scaled muscle, it is the, as you see here, who doesn't remember, this is our anterior scaled muscle. It is the major division for our left subclavian artery and right subclavian artery. So, first part, behind the scalene, it is the second part, and afterwards it comes the third part, right? Clear, I guess, till here, right? Afterwards, we're having the branching of our arteries, right? Our subclavian artery. All the branches from the right and left subclavian arteries arise from the first part of the artery. So, meaning that the first part, after that, it is divided into the majority of the parts. We're having the vertebral artery, we're having the thoracocervical trunk, internal thoracic artery, and a costocervical trunk. So, as you see, with these branches, what we are having, that we will see one more time in this photo, they are giving a huge supply to the whole vertebral column with the vertebral arteries, the thoracocervical trunk, right? Internal thoracic artery is there, so supplying the whole thoracic cavity, and also costocervical trunk. So we are having a huge supply with just one subclavian artery, right? First start, let's with the vertebral artery. And vertebral artery, it is the first branch of the subclavian artery, and it enters at the entry of the root of the neck. It is a large branch arising from the first part of the subclavian artery medial to the anterior scalene muscle, right? And it ascends and enters the foramen in the transverse process, like foramen transversum of the vertebra through the C6, like cervical vertebra number 6. It continues to pass superiorly, and the vertebral artery passes through the foramen of the vertebra C1, C5, from C5 to C1, and at the superior border of the C1, it turns medially and crosses the posterior arch of the vertebral C1. Thus, we can say that it crossed the whole vertebral column, like vertebral patties. And from here, it passes through the foramen magnum to enter the posterior cranial fossa. So, our vertebral artery has a huge way how it is going and supplying whole cervical vertebrae, right? And plus, we should not forget that this is our first, let's say, first vertebra, well, first branch. In this photo, I don't know if you noticed or not, this is exactly going upwards, right, next to the transverse foraminus. So whatever you see next to the vertebral column, like this part, it is our vertebral artery that we were talking about, right? So as you see, it is the first branch starting from here. After that, after the vertebral artery, we're having our thoracocervical trunk, which is second branch of our subclavian artery, and it is divided into three branches: the inferior thyroid, the transverse cervical, and the suprascapular arteries. It is a really huge branch, as you see here, this one, and it is dividing, right? So it divided into the inferior thyroid, and name even implies what it can give us the branch. The transverse cervical, so it is supplying the cervical part, and the suprascapular arteries, so meaning that it is supplying the scapular areas, right? So to see here, right, it's the same on the both side, we will have like the ascending cervical, which is going to the vertebral column. We are having transverse cervical artery, and first it is our suprascapular artery, right? So talking about the inferior thyroidal artery, which is one of the branches, it is the superior continuation of our thyrocervical tract. It is ascending anterior to the anterior Selen muscle, and then turns medially, crossing the posterior to the carotid sheath and its content, and anterior to the vertebral artery, reaching the posterior surface of the thyroid gland, and it supplies the whole thyroid gland. To see another photo for this. Here we would be able to see better. So we see our subclavian artery, right? And as you see here, this branch, it is going and supplying our thyroid gland, right? So exactly this one, it is our inferior thyroid artery. Inferior thyroid artery, when it turns medially, it gives also another branches. For example, the ascending cervical artery, which continues to ascend the anterior surface of our paravertebral muscle, supplying the muscles, and also sending some branches to our spinal cord. Thus, as you may see on these photos, we see here our ascending cervical artery, right? This part. So this will be the branch of our inferior thyroid artery. Another branch that our thyrocervical tract it is giving, it is the middle branch. And this branch, it is called transverse cervical artery. And the transverse cervical artery is this. So just to summarize what we've talked about already, we are having like subclavian artery. Subclavian artery's first branch, it is the vertebral artery. After that, we are having our thoracocervical tract, which itself branches out, right? First branch of our thoracocervical tract, it is our inferior thyroidal artery, which in sense also gives us the ascending cervical artery, right? Talking about the another branch of our thoracocervical tract, it is our transverse cervical artery, and it is the middle branch of thoracocervical tract. It branches past laterally across the anterior surface of the anterior Salen muscle, enters and crosses the base of the posterior triangle of the neck. It continues to deep surface of the trapezius muscle, whereas it is divided into superficial and deep branches itself. And it has like the superficial branches, which are continuous on the trapezius muscle. If you remember, the trapezius muscle was called like due to its shape, right? And deep branches also continue to the deep surface of the rhomboid muscle near the medial border of the scapula, right? Yeah. So thus we can say that our transverse cervical artery, it is the part or branch of thyrocervical artery, and it has a really huge pathway, and we are dividing this pathway to the superficial and deep layers according to where they are going. And they are, as you see here, it is crossing all over the scalene muscle, and after that it gives us like superficial branches and the deep branches, right? And not final, but one of the branch for our let's say from our thyrocervical tract, it is this final branch. I hope that I'm pointing. Yeah, and this is called our suprascapular artery, right? So this suprascapular artery, it is the lowest branch of the thyrocervical trunk. The branch passes laterally, crossing the anterior to the anterior scalene muscle, the phrenic nerve, the third part of the subclavian artery, and the trunks of the brachial plexus. At the superior border of the scapula, it crosses over the superior transverse scapular ligament and enters the supraspinatus fossa, right? So to see better, we can see this photo here. And we're having whole branching how the suprascapular artery is coming, right? So we see the humerus, we see the scapular bone, we see the clavicle, right? And this huge branch, what we see here, it is our left or right, we can say, left, what artery will be it, guys, called? Subclavian artery, right? Left subclavian artery that further divided into the axillary artery, right? And we see our trunk, and this trunk divided into the suprascapular artery that, as you see, is supplying the whole part of our scapula, right? So it created some kind of anastomosis with each other. So we are having like the further, like our suprascapular artery. Further, our suprascapular artery is dividing into the dorsal suprascapular arteries, which is further creating the, like, merging with the intercostal arteries, and they are kind of creating the plexus, right? Another branch, one of the branches of our subclavian artery, it is also the internal thoracic artery. And internal thoracic artery, it is this one, as you see, it is not going upwards as others were going upwards, vice versa, it is going downwards. Thus, this artery normally branches, as you see, from the inferior border of the subclavian artery and descends downwards. It passes posterior to the clavicle, the large veins in the region, and anterior to the pleural cavity. It enters the thoracic cavity posterior to the ribs and anterior to the transverse thoracic muscle, and continues its way until it descends and gives off the numerous branches. And it is having their own function there. It is supplying these underneath the rib parts, some of the pleural cavities also. Another branch that we're having of the subclavian artery, it is our costocervical trunk. This part here. Costocervical trunk, it has its own characteristics. It is slightly different by its position. On the left, it arises from the first part of the subclavian artery, just medial to the anterior scalene muscle. And on the right, it arises from the second part of the subclavian artery. It can divide in two branches, like deep cervical artery branches and supreme intercostal arteries. So deep cervical artery ascends in the back of the neck and anastomosis with the descending branch of the occipital artery. And our supreme intercostal artery descends anterior to the rib number 1 and then divides to form the posterior intercostal arteries for the first two intercostal spaces. So thus, we can say that, and we can summarize our subclavian arteries, what we are having, right? We are having subclavian arteries, further that will become our vertebral artery, further that it is becoming the axillary artery, right? So it has a huge way to the upper limb, and we will discuss further ways in our upper limb position. It has several branches itself. It has our first branch, which is our vertebral artery, that it is ascending to the C1 and going in the foramen magnum. It has our thoracocervical tract, and it has costocervical tract, right? Talking about our thoracocervical tract, which we see here or here, it is the same. It has branchings like the transverse cervical artery, suprascapular artery, and inferior thyroidal artery. Inferior thyroidal artery further gives us the branch of ascending cervical artery. Transverse cervical artery is just above the skull and muscle, and it is supplying the upper part, let's say. And suprascapular arteries, further it is also branching out and giving us the deep and superficial layers. Another branch, these branches were all located in the superior side, and we are having also the inferior side part, which is our internal thoracic arteries, branches. And they are just going straight ahead in the thoracic cavity. Do you have any kind of questions regarding this? Another part that we are discussing, and this is like simply going through as we are having the arteries, it is our veins. And we're having a huge amount of the veins that are passing the root of the neck. And they are exactly accompanying the arteries that we are having, just like the flow is different, right? The subclavian veins begin in the lateral margin of the rib number 1, continues with the axillary vein, as it is exactly the same as we see here for the arteries, passing medially on each both sides, again to the anterior scalene muscle, then divided into the subclavian vein. It is joining to internal jugular vein to form the brachiocephalic vein. So veins are having exactly the same location as our arteries had, so it is exactly the same. Continuing and talking about our vessels, as we've already discussed the neck area. From the neck area, we're having these vessels going to the scalp and the face, right? So, here to see we're having brachiocephalic tract and our subclavian artery. Subclavian artery had our vertebral artery, first branch. Second branch was our thoracocervical artery, right? And we see our carotid sinus here, which was one of the branches of our brachiocephalic arteries, right? Like the common carotid artery. And when we're talking the vessels of the face, the arteries supply the face is primarily from the branches of the external carotid artery, through which we are having a huge blood supply to the brain and the face. And we are having also internal carotid arteries. And internal carotid arteries, they are giving mostly, like, let's say, limited supply to the face, but still they are giving one, right? Most of the venous return is back to the internal jugular vein through the connections and venous drainages, which are going through the face. And also we're having some cavernous sinuses in the intracranial area, so they are also draining the brain part, right? So, one more time, we are having like the internal and external carotid arteries, right? After the carotid sinus, we're having internal and external carotid arteries. The first and most important branch that it is supplying our face, it is our facial artery, right? This one here. So talking to the facial artery, it is the major vessel that supplies the face. It branches from the anterior surface of the external carotid artery, passes up through the deep structures of the neck, and appears at the lower border of the mandible, passing posterior to the submandibular gland. Here it is, if you remember, our submandibular gland, and it is passing through it, going upwards. It is curving around curving around the inferior border of the mandible, anterior to the masseter, where its pulse can be felt if we are compressing that, right? And after that, it is entering straight ahead to the face. For after this point, our facial artery runs upwards and medially in this course, and also it passes alongside of the nose and terminates as an angular arteries in the medial corner of the eye. Okay, so do you have any kind of questions regarding this? So this is our facial artery, how it's continuing and ending as an angular artery. Here, that's the eye, right? Facial artery. To see another photo for that. So here, it is our external carotid artery, right? And this is our facial artery, how it is created angle or our mandible, right? And then going up medially. Here we have cut photo to show the angle how they are facial artery along its path to the deep platysma, residuals, and zygomatis major and minor, also to buccinator and levator angus oris. It is passing deeply, and also it passes superiorly to the levator labii superioris, right? So this, you just like muscles, no one will ask you, at least I won't be asking you on the quiz the muscles, but you should just know exact locations, right? It has several branches. Facial artery branches include the superior and inferior labial branches, and also lateral nasal branches. The labial branches arise at the corner of the mouth, and we're having inferior labial and we're having superior labial branches. It is seen better in this photo. Inferior labial branches supply is logically the lower lip, and we're having superior labial branches that supply the upper lip and also provide a branch for the septum, right? Nasal septum. So here, we see how our facial artery has angulated, right? And came medially. And we see like the superior labial branch. And lower, we see as it went behind the muscle, we see the inferior labial branch, right? Also, if you see here, a part also like the superior labial branch also divided and gave us the lateral nasal artery that supplied the nasals of the nose, right? Another branch that facial artery is having, it is our transverse facial artery. And it is the another one who is contributing to the face supply. And it is not the branch of our external carotid artery, vice versa. It is the branch of our superficial temporal artery. And exactly it is giving off this one. Transverse facial artery arises from the superficial temporal artery within the substance of the parotid gland, passes through the parotid gland, and crosses the face in the transverse direction. The facial artery was doing that in the medial direction, and the transverse facial artery is doing the transverse direction. It is like on the masseter's muscle between the zygomatic arch and parotid gland, right? So logically, if you will see, transverse facial artery would be this part here, right? And it is going more transversely. And this is like the major blood supply of our facial artery, let's say, while it is coming from the external carotid, another it is coming from the transfer from the our temporal artery, right? We are having another branch, which is called our maxillary artery. And the maxillary artery, it is the largest of the two terminal branches of the external carotid artery. And maxillary artery, as the name implies, it is normally located on the maxilla, right? That's why it got its own name. And it gives us several branches that are further continuing and supplying our mental area, buccal area, and also orbital area. So we are having infraorbital artery, which enters the face through the infraorbital foramen and supplies the lower eyelid, upper lip, and area between the structures. So we can see our supraorbital artery here, and further how it is dividing and supplying these areas. We are having also buccal artery, enters the face of the superficial surface and superficial surface of the buccinator muscles and supplies the structures in the area. And we're having the mental arteries, which enter the face through the mental foramen and supply the chin area, right? So here on this photo, we can see very well does the blood supply what we have discussed. We're having the external carotid artery, right? It gave a branch to our facial artery that went medially, right? We had the branches of the superficial labial and inferior labia, and also nasal lateral septal branches. We had also the maxillary branch, maxillary artery, that supplied went through the maxillary bone and supplied the maxillary part, right? We also had like the superficial temporal artery that further gave branch of our facial artery, transverse facial artery, that went to all the transverse side and entered the orbital area, right? We are having also branch of the buccal arteries here, and we are having infraorbital arteries here, and these arteries will be located here, which are further supplying the locations by its name, right? Another branch that it is also really important for us, it is our ophthalmic artery, right? And ophthalmic artery, yes, you understand it really well. It supplies the eye region mostly, as the name implies. It has several branches, and as in which bone they will be located normally, ophthalmic arteries. Zygomatic, right? So according to that, they will have also the names, right? So ophthalmic arteries, these are two small arteries coming from the internal carotid arteries. I would like to highlight all the arteries that we had. They were coming almost from the external carotid arteries. Some were coming from the temporal area, but these ophthalmic arteries, they are coming from the internal carotid arteries. And they are having their own two branches. One of them, it is zygomaticofacial artery. The name is a bit long, and it will be here, right, on the zygomatic bone. And it comes from the lacrimal branch of the ophthalmic artery, enters the face, and supplies the zygomaticofacial foramen and supplies the face over the zygomatic bone. And we're having another branch which is called the dorsal nasal artery. It is a terminal branch of the ophthalmic artery, and it exists the orbit in the medial corner and supplies the dorsum of the nose. Okay. Talking about like do you have any kind of questions regarding this? No. I guess it's really easy regarding this, right? Talking about the veins of the talking about the veins, we are having the names are almost the same, the roots are almost the same. We are having transverse facial veins. The transverse facial vein is a small vein that accompanies the transverse facial artery in the journey across the face. It empties into the superficial temporal vein within the substance of the parotid gland. And we can see here that we are having the ophthalmic veins, right? We are having infraorbital veins. We're having the facial veins. So infraorbital branches are going to the facial vein. Facial vein it is going to has a branch also to the deep facial vein. And further, they are all gathering in the superior jugular vein, right? Also, if you remember, we had in the brain the cavernous sinus, and also cavernous sinus was gathering everything, and it is going in the superior vena cava, right? Questions regarding this? No? It seems really easy, right? If you don't have questions, we can have a break for several minutes and then continue with the scalp arteries and branches. Hey guys, let's continue as we will have time for questions also. Yeah, we've talked about the arteries and veins of the scalp. Sorry, not scalp, but the face, and we should continue with the arteries and veins of the scalp, right? So, uh, so the idea here it is that, as I mentioned on these photos, that we are having like the internal and external carotid arteries, and our external carotid arteries are the ones who are supplying the majority, right, majority of our face. However, some of them are supplying also internal carotid arteries. But what's more important that our external carotid arteries are having some kind of branches that further it is supplying the scalp and upper parts of the brain, right? So these branches are, for example, the superficial temporal, posterior auricle, and like occipital arteries, and they are having ability to supply the lateral and posterior aspect of the scalp. And here we see our posterior articular artery, this one, and also the vein. We see occipital artery going here, right? And as you see, they are straight ahead the branches of the external carotid artery. And also we're having like superficial temporal, which is further here branching up on the upper side, and this is our superficial temporal artery. And also this temporal artery was further branching and giving us a transverse facial artery. Now to talk about like posterior auricular artery, and as the name implies, it is going behind the ears, right? And it is supplying the scalp posterior to the ear. We are having the occipital artery, and as the name implies, it will supply the occipital area of our the occiput, right? So it is going again posterior aspect of the scalp, and we're having like the superficial temporal arteries, and these are these arteries here, and they are divided into the anterior and posterior branches, and they are almost supplying the whole lateral side of our scalp. And to see better these photos, we can check here, and here we are having combination of our facial and scalp arteries, right? So we see here the occipital artery, how it is going and supplying the whole occipital area, and the temporal artery, which is further supplying the temporal bone, right? And exactly on the maxillary level, it gave us the branch of our transverse facial artery. Talking about the veins, as I mentioned, they are having the same course, and veins draining the scalp follow the same pattern in the arteries. So we're having like our supratrochlear and supraorbital veins drain the anterior part of the scalp from the supraciliary arches to the vertex of the head, passes inferiorly to the supraciliary arches, communicating with the ophthalmic veins. So exactly we're talking on this area, right? So we're having the supraorbital, supratrochlear arches. They are communicating with each other, and they are creating some kind of, let's say, collaboration anastomosis with each other, right? Further, as you see, they are draining in our superficial temporal vein that enters the lateral area of our scalp, and before passing inferiorly to join other areas, there we're also having our retromandibular vein that it is joining the supraventricular to our superficial temporal vein. Talking about the posterior auricular vein, it is like so. as the artery was located, the vein is located on the same side. They are going along to each other, and they drain the posterior aspect of the scalp, and they are emptying into the retromandibular vein also. And that's we're having like our occipital vein, which is like this vein here, which is supplying the whole occiput part. It drains the posterior aspect of the scalp from the vertex, from the external occiput area. And also the branches are also draining some of the vertex location. And thus they are all going to the to the external jugular vein, right? Rather they are joining the heart. So to see better all the veins that we've talked about, it is really well located here. So we are having, let's start with the structures that we all know and we all had seen. We're having, let's say, with the superficial temporal vein, right? And as you see, we're having frontal tributary and superficial temporal veins, parietal tributary and superficial temporal vein. They are gathering in the superficial temporal vein. Further, we are having also middle temporal vein, which is opening in the superficial temporal veins. And it is opening in the retromandibular vein, which is kind of a small pool for the venous blood supply that further is going to the internal jugular vein, right? Also, from the retromandibular vein, we are having like crossovers, meaning the posterior auricular vein, it is going straight ahead to the internal jugular vein, and also we're having retromandibular vein, which is like creating a conjunction with the posterior auricular and retromandibular veins. Talking about the occipital vein, as we've talked, as you see, it is like supplying the whole vertex and the posterior part, and it is also opening into the retromandibular vein and further to the external jugular vein. Further, they are all going into the brachiocephalic vein and then like the heart, right? Here we can really well see, and one more time go through the facial blood supply that we already discussed. We had like a supratrochlear vein, we have like supraorbital vein that further were giving us the angular veins. They were all going to the, let's say, facial vein, and facial vein was with the communicating branches going to the retromandibular vein and then joining our, let's say, external and internal jugular veins, right? So you see how the face and, let's say, the scalp, they are interconnected and interchanged with the blood supply. Another structure that you already discussed it in neurology, I just go through it like really smoothly. Let's say it is our blood-brain supply, and blood receives the arteries from the two pairs of the vessels. It is the vertebral arteries, and we have seen the vertebral arteries not in this photo, but in the beginning of this chapter here, the vertebral arteries that it was going through the transverse foraminus and going to the magnum foramen, right, and entering the brain. And we are having also internal carotid arteries, and exactly these two branches are supplying the brain, which are also interconnected, and they are giving us the huge arterial circle, which is called circus of Billy, right? I hope you remember it from neurology. So this is kind of collaboration of the all arteries that we've studied on the previous class, and we also studied it together, where today we're having the aortic arch, and we're having the brachiocephalic tract, right subclavian artery, right common carotid artery, and external and internal carotid arteries. On the left side, we're having our left common carotid artery and left subclavian artery. And from this side, left common carotid artery was opposing our right internal carotid artery, right? Also, we had like from the right and left subclavian arteries, we had right and left vertebral arteries, and they were the ones who were merging together and giving us a basilar artery. That basilar artery was dividing into the posterior cerebral arteries, and they were communicating with the right and left internal carotid artery with the communicating arteries. Further, they were giving us the branches like the ophthalmic branch and like the middle cerebral branch. Also, we had like extension of the right and left internal carotid arteries were our anterior cerebral arteries, and also they were connecting to each other with the anterior communicating arteries, right? So as we see, this is how all are interconnected with each other. And we can say that this area, what was created here, it is called the arterial circle of Willis. And through two vertebral arteries that enter the cranial cavity through the foramen magnum, right? They went through the foramen magnum to the brain, and inferior to the pons, they merged and they gave us the basilar artery. And also to our internal carotid arteries, they are going through the carotid canals, and they are also entering the brain through these canals, right? So, did you understood this? Do you have any kind of questions regarding this? I guess it's really easy. You just need to memorize the names for that, right? Where exactly they are located and what branches they are giving to us. The most major things, that's iconic things that you see here, it is our covered carotid arteries, right? So we are having two common carotid arteries, right? And they are proceeding superiorly to the skull of the base of the skull, where they are entering through the common carotid canal. So to see photos for that really well, we can see this photo here. So here you see how they entered the skull, right? On this location. So each anterior internal carotid artery enters the cranial cavity through the carotid canal in the petrous part of the temporal bone. And entering the cranial cavity, each of the internal carotid arteries is branching into several outpouchings. For example, they are giving us the ophthalmic artery, posterior communicating artery, middle cerebral branch also, and anterior cerebral artery. So thus we can say that our circus of Willis was created by the branching of the internal carotid arteries, right? So what are the vertebral arteries doing, and what are their main function, right? If it all was created with the internal carotid arteries. As we see, this is our, what is this, guys? Which branch it is, this one, guys? So, exactly, okay. And we are having here our beloved vertebral artery, right? So exactly our vertebral arteries, we already talked a brief information about that. We will continue about that. So each vertebral arteries arise from the first part of our subclavian artery, right? In the lower part of the neck, and it is passing superior through the transverse foraminas of the upper 6 cervical vertebrae. And as you see here, we see how cervical parts are going through the transverse foramina as if it is like the vertebral bodies are screwed on each other, right? They are printed on each other. And we see here how the Atlantic part of the vertebral artery went into the foramen magnum, and it became our intracranial part, right? And exactly when on the entering to the cranial cavity through the foramen magnum, each vertebral artery is giving us small meningeal branches that further is supplying our meningeal arteries, meaning that's supplying the meninges, right? To check on this photo, we don't have here the meningeal branches painted, however they do that. So after vertebral arteries gave us the meningeal arteries, they give us 3 additional branches which further continue and communicate with the basilar arteries and having their own pathway, and we will see them really well on this photo here. So we are giving us the anterior spinal artery. So this is our vertebral artery, and they gave us the anterior spinal artery. And one branch joins with its companion through the other side from the single anterior spinal artery, which then descends in the anterior median fission of the spinal cord. Do you remember, guys, our spinal cord, white matter and gray matter? Gray matter was creating the butterfly, and it has like some in-pouchings, right? It was inside the parts where our commissure was located, and we had like the posterior and anterior side, right? Posterior side was the side where we got the sensory information, and anterior side was where we were sending our posterior, our motor information, right? Exactly on that side, closer to our anterior commissure, we are having our anterior spinal artery, right? That descends through the anterior medial fissure of the spinal cord. And we will have another branch also, which is like second branch, which is giving us the posterior spinal arteries, which pass posterior around the medulla, ascend to on the posterior surface of the spinal cord in the area of attachment of the posterior roots. And we are having not one, but we are having 2 posterior arteries. However, we're having 1 anterior spinal artery, right? Just before having the 2 posterior vertebral arteries, we're having the posterior inferior cerebral artery, which is also a branch of our vertebral artery. So to summarize these 2 photos, I will just do it like this. We had the basilar artery, right? Here. This is our basilar artery. And this is our vertebral basilar artery. And then we see here how vertebral arteries gave our basilar artery, right? We see our anterior spinal artery. We see 2 posterior spinal arteries. 2 posterior spinal arteries, they are crossing around the posterior roots, right? So we're having also the posterior spinal medullary artery, which is just going inside and creating a segmental artery. And also we are having anterior spinal medullary artery, which is creating exactly this segmental artery. So in communication of our posterior medullary artery and anterior medullary artery, we are having created a segmental artery, right? We are having also radicular arteries, and radicular arteries, they are the ones who are branches of the our, let's say, anterior and posterior spinal artery. So we can say that the basilar artery travels in a rostral direction along the anterior side of the pons. The branches in caudal to the rostral direction includes the anterior inferior cerebral arteries, small pontile arteries, and the superior cerebral arteries. So I'm talking about this. As you see here, we created our anterior spinal artery has came up. This is this artery that further continued its pathway and merged with the brainstem, right? So we're having anterior spinal artery, and on the both sides we're having the vertebral arteries, which created our basal artery, and our basilar artery then gave its own branches, and we're talking about these branches right here. So you see here anterior inferior cerebral arteries. You are having fontanelle arteries, and you will see here these superior cerebral arteries, right? So these arteries fully supply the pons area of the brain. And as you see, our basilar artery ends at the bifurcation and giving us to the posterior cerebral arteries, right? So here, we supply the whole pons, right? After that, we are having already the midbrain region, right? And these structures, what are here, it is called our circus of Willi, and exactly this part here, it is like schematically pointed out that we will see right now. So one more time to better understand this. Before here, we had this kind of arteries. When we enter the brainstem, we already have this area, and this area, it is the basilar area, what we see here, right? And when we're discussing the midbrain, we're talking already the common, like circus of Willi, this upper part here, right? So talking about our arterial circus of Willi, is formed at the base of the brain by the interconnecting vertebrobasilar and internal carotid system of the vessels, what we have already discussed. And its communication, it is done by the communicating arteries, and even it is named as the communicating arteries, right? We're having our anterior communicating artery, and we had also the posterior communicating artery, right? Just to see here, anterior and posterior communicating artery. Same here, the posterior communicating artery and anterior communicating artery. As you see my mouse, right, as it is moving. Our anterior communicating artery connects the left and right anterior cerebral arteries towards each other, right? So here we are having the left and right side, for example, and anterior one, it was collaborating between two of them. And we're having two posterior communicating arteries right here. These ones. And they were connecting the internal carotid artery with the posterior cerebral artery, right? The posterior cerebral artery was a branch of our vertebral artery. And thus it communicated with the internal, it's communicating between the internal and the posterior cerebral arteries. So as you see here, this was the branch of our vertebral, and then with our internal, so we had a huge circle of the both two arteries. So when they are coming from the aortic arch, we kind of think that they would not create any kind of anastomosis, right? They are so divided. However, afterward, they are giving us the whole circus of Willi. So one more time to go through, and we've seen it how it is supplying from the inferior part of the brain, but let's see how they will supply on the superior part also. So it is another photo of our circus of Willi, and another schematic overview, let's say like that. Everything is what it is painted, it is the same. However, like with the different photos, it has like different sensations that you are studying something new, right? So anterior spinal artery entered the vertebral artery, posterior inferior cerebral arteries, and we're having the basilar artery Fontanelle arteries were here, superior cerebellar artery, anterior and inferior cerebellar arteries. They are in the brainstem. They don't supply the superior portion of the cerebral cortex. And then we reach to posterior cerebellar artery, posterior communicating arteries. Then it's connected with the internal carotid artery. We are having middle, the branch of the internal carotid artery was our middle cerebral artery. And as you see, middle cerebral artery supplied the lateral aspect of our brain, right, of the cortex. We see that after that we're getting our anterior cerebellar arteries, and as you see, our anterior cerebellar arteries supplied most of the frontal bone of the cerebellum, right? And we are having like posterior cerebellar artery, and they supplied mostly the occipital bone of the cerebral bone. However, we can say that like the name, not however, like we can say that the middle supplies the middle part, posterior is supplying the posterior part, and anterior is supplying the anterior part of the brain, right? Logically, the names are replying itself. Talking about the, like guys, do you have any kind of questions regarding this? It is easy. The name, you just need to memorize the names what we are having there, right? Another thing that we're having, it is our venous drainage, right? And venous drainage of the brain begins internally as a network of small venous channels lead to the large cerebral veins, which eventually empty into the dura venous sinus, right? So the dura venous sinus is an endothelial lined space between the outer periosteal and inner meningeal layers of the dura mater, and eventually lead to the internal jugular vein. So we see here really well our dural venous space, right? And we can say that this is the topographic photo, right? Who can say what layers you can see here from the topographic neuroanatomy? Skin? What else? Subcutaneous tissue, yes, afterwards. Connective tissue, yes. Great, 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 great. So we went to the duravenous system, and as you see here, we're having emissary veins that are opening in the connective tissue, and they are supplying the upper part, like the mostly superficial kind of layer of our bones, right? And they are called the emissary veins, that they are opening straight ahead into the dural venous system, right? And as you see further, we are having also our diploic veins, right? And diploic veins are, in turn, they are straight ahead, opening in the diploid of our cortical bone, compact bone of the roof of the cranial cavity. And they are supplying they are draining the bone itself. And emissary veins, they are the ones who are just outside the dural venous sinus and supplying like even above the bone, right? So final point where they are draining, they are all in gathering in the dural venous sinus. Why it is important for us to know about the emissary veins, and don't forget about that, because they can conduct infections through the dural venous sinus. If you remember from the physiology, we mentioned that the veins are having the valves, right? However, our emissary veins, they do not have valves, so meaning that neither there are like really strong muscles. So we can say that there is no valves, there is no some kind of border for infection to something that will stop So thus, we are getting really easily the infection to the dural vena sinus, right? So afterwards, our dural vena sinus, it is emptying logically in which area, guys? Yes, the final point will be our superficial, our internal jugular veins, right? Also, what I want to highlight, we are having cerebellar veins that are also opening in the dura mater, dural vena sinus. To see how everything is working there, this is our photo and what all these sinuses we are having and where everything is located. So, as you see here, we are having our, let's say, let's start with the lower, like occipital part, right? So we are having the confluence of the sinuses, right? And we are having our superior sagittal sinus, and we are having right transverse sinus, sigmoidal sinus, and superior petrosal sinus that are all gathering in our, let's say, the confluence of the sinuses, right? It is also having, like, it is draining also from the stridus sinus, and stridus sinus itself, it is draining from the sagittal sinus. We're having sigmoidal sinus, we're having the superficial petrosal sinus, superior petrosal sinus, and we're having sphenoparietal sinus, intercavernous sinus is also, and thus we are gathering all here, and here we're having our cavernous sinus, where everything what we've discussed is draining here, and also not only the upper part of the head, but also the branches of our ophthalmic vein, and also the facial, like lateral side facial nerves, they are opening all here, right? So we can say that dural vena sinus includes the superior sagittal, inferior sagittal, stride, transverse, sigmoidal, occipital, confluence of the sinuses, cavernous, sphenotemporal, superior petrosal, inferior petrosal, and basilar sinuses all together. Right? Do you have any kind of questions with that? If not, we have done with the anatomy class today. Now let's do some questions, right? Guys, do you have any kind of questions with this information that we've discussed? No. Then let's do our questions. Let me open the slides. Un momento, please, guys. Okay, here. These are the MCQs, so we can discuss it. Similar kind of MCQs you will receive on your quiz, but not this one. This is just for the practice. The questions are here really easy, basic, just to understand if you understood the material or not. For example, so guys, if you're speaking up the answer, of course you will be speaking up the answers. Please say it out loud that I could hear, right? First question. At which of the following levels does the base of the heart lie? Answer A, B, C, or D. Who told the B? That was correct. Good. Can you say more about that? What you know about the anatomic location of the heart? behind the sternum. Yes, that's correct. What else? Yes. 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 Who can add some more exact locations, guys? Who can add? Yeah. Okay. Good. Which of the following does not open into the right atrium? There are a lot of answers. So, guys, let's do like that. Who said A? Okay. Who said A? Just can you tell me information what you know about the coronary sinuses? What you know about the coronary sinuses? Who said that? Okay. So what is the function of the coronary sinuses? Okay, so the coronary sinuses we can describe as a major coronary vein located in the section of the heart. It is like the one who is in the right atrium, right? And it is the one who is draining the blood, the oxygenated blood from the heart muscle into the right atrium. So this one, it is opening in the right atrium. We need which one is not. Inferior vena cava, we are just like right ahead. Excluding that, right? It is the correct answer also. Pulmonary orifice. Right ventricle to the where? To where? I just need you to talk more, guys. Exactly, pulmonary trunk, right? So this is from the ventricle to the pulmonary arteries, right? And talking about the right atrioventricular or orifice, what it is? From the atrium to the vein, right? From the atrium to the ventricle, right? So yes, the correct answer would be here C. As it is, the answer is saying us which not open, right? Okay. Next one, it is the apex of the heart is formed by right or left? Left. Okay, that's correct. The heart is supplied. Okay, don't see it. Okay. Let me read the question. The heart is supplied because we're having here online people also, so they need to, hear it. The heart is supplied by the cardiac nervous plexus, which is composed of. Okay, yeah, correct. Which of the following supplies the apex of the heart? Okay, that's correct. Good. And the sixth question. Blockage of which of the following will cause ischemia of the infundibulum? This is interesting question, right? You should tell me why you think this is A, this is B, or C, or D. A or C? But we are having here exactly infundibulum. What's infundibulum of the heart? Okay, yeah. So we can say that a blockage of the blockage at father ischemia of the apex of the heart would be by guys, who remembers the blood supply? Do you want a photo of the blood supply? I guess yes, right? I will just open here. So maybe it will give us some more clarity. I don't know. At least I'm not going to tell you the answers. Do you see here? Yeah. I will zoom it. The picture, just the internet. Can you see, guys? So in the answers, we're having these ones. We're having the anterior intraventricular artery, right conus artery, posterior intraventricular artery, and left conus artery. We can say, like, guys, what's intraventricular artery? It is another name for our anterior, left anterior descending artery, like LAD, if you remember, right? It is the same as the descending artery. So which one? Infundibulum. I don't know. I have no idea for that yet. I know. Okay, I will say like that. Infundibulum. Who can exactly tell me which location is infundibulum of the heart? Infundibulum, known as the conus arteriosus, is a conal outpouching from the upper and left angle of the right ventricle, right? In the chondrate of the heart, from where we're having the pulmonary trunks arising, right? Is it clear now what it is infundibulum? Okay, now logically, according to the blood supply that you know, what it is, which branch it is supplying the infundibulum? Yeah, I will show the answers, okay? Guys, you are on the correct way. The answer here will be You know what I will do? I won't tell you the answer for that. Take the photo of this question, guys. In next class, you will give me exactly a one. Okay, let's. This. So according to that, with all your notes, you are creating one PPT slide, just one PPT slide, you know, and you are bringing it on your computers, and we will start with the explanation for, like, why. Okay, if the question is incorrect, you are just doing both of the sides. This is how you will study the hard supply. Okay, good. Question number 5, please everyone take the photo for that because I will be asking for that. Sorry, question number 6. Okay, question number 7 and 8. If the right coronary artery is blocked, which of the following will not be affected? You should know exactly the right coronary artery blood supply. The right coronary artery supplies the right ventricle, right atrium, SA node, and AV node, right? Yes, correct. And final question for today. Anterior cardiac veins drain into A, B, C, or D. So what will be the final answer? B, right atrium. That's correct. Okay, 2 more questions. Let's do till 10, okay? At which level does the common carotid artery divide? It is kind of today's also. Okay, you were kind of correct. It is C3 and C4. Okay? It is B. But sometimes it is also said like C4 and C5, but in our books it is C3, C4. And the final question. Which of the following is not supplied by the circus of Billy? I don't know. We are having like which is not supplied by the. If you listen to my lecture today, you kind of have idea. Brain, maybe? Brain is supplied, yes, we'll discuss. Okay, nice. Eyes? Eyes? I don't know. Like you decide you are having like If you're telling me answered pharynx, you should tell me why. If you're telling me brain, why? Okay, now official answer would be like that, that when the optic chiasma, guys, is entering to the, let's go back to the explanation part here. This is the circus of Willi, right, guys? See what structure it is? What? It's yellow. Optic chiasma, right? And as you see here, we're having the anterior communicating arteries, right? And anterior cerebral arteries, right? They are supplied by the circus of Willi. Okay? Yeah, what is left? What answers we are having left here? I forgot. The, oh my god. Nose and the pharynx. Pharynx or nose? Yes, that's correct answer. It is not supplied by the circus of Willi. Okay, guys. Thank you for today. You remember your homework that you should tell me the infundibulum is supplied by which arteries. Thank you for today's class. If you're having any questions, feel free to ask me anytime.